And talking of which, let's speak now to James Heal, who's the political correspondent at The Spectator. Lots to talk to James about. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Russell.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. Sorry, I can hardly hear you, actually. Hang on, let me just try it. Yes, there you go. Yeah, James, can you hear me okay? That's better, that's better. Right, let's talk about social care, first of all. So this is, I think, the rather unexpected announcement by government today that despite their promises to fix the problems of social care, which of course is affecting more and more people in this country, particularly as we get older, and therefore, I guess, become more of a burden, the surprising news that the Labour government are going to kick the can down the road with regard to any seeming solution. 2028 is what they're talking about now. I mean, we're only just in 2025, so another 3 years to wait for a remedy. That wasn't in their manifesto, James, was it?
No, absolutely. And of course, Labour was elected on the pledge that they would go after these big issues that the Tories had kicked the can down the road on. And yet, of course, perhaps the biggest long-term time bomb facing this country, one that's been deferred by endless governments, they've now chosen to themselves delay. And you think 2028 is going to be a difficult year for them. By that point in the electoral cycle, you'd be looking to kind of have all the barnacles off the boat, as it were. You'd be looking to go into an election year with not much controversy. And yet you can clearly see how, you know, if this happens in 2028, you'll have it deferred again to 2030 if Labour win power again. And thereafter, will it ever get solved?
Yeah, unlikely, I think, isn't it? Let's be honest, that Labour will be... I mean, maybe they're going to have a late surge in 2028 and impress us all that all of the things that they actually said that they were going to do in their manifesto upon which they got elected, they end up doing. You know, things like cutting waiting lists, cutting immigration, not taxing pretty much everybody despite what label they put on them. But anyway, that's for another time, I'm sure. So, yeah, this is very, very concerning, though. The fact that they're saying it's going to take 3 years, it is kicking the can down the road. It's another commission of which, of course, they have instigated many, a bit like the quangos that, of course, they have already put in place. It seems to me that Labour are already out of ideas 6 months into government, James.
Well, are they also prepared to wrestle with the hard politics of this? And, you know, this morning, Wes Streeting, who's considered one of the Cabinet's better communicators, was out there saying, you know, there are good policy choices, but there's no good politics. Well, that is the whole point. When to govern is to choose. And I think some people are now asking within Labour, you know, Wes Streeting is a great communicator, but is he going to be able to back this up with serious delivery on this? And so he was handed the health brief, including, of course, the sort of lesser overlooked sister of the healthcare system, which is the care system, promised to have a national care system. And yet I think people are a bit disappointed that we're going to wait until 2028. Yes, we'll see a 2026 interim report, but frankly, given the scale of these problems, the fact that we've had a report in 1999, 2011, 2017, Boris Johnson as well, all these different reports and promises, I think lots of people think this is ever going to get solved.
And why is it so difficult? Why is it so tricky? I mean, is it that broken that it needs to literally be blown up by way of some kind of creative destruction and reset? I mean, why is it so difficult, this problem of social care in Britain?
There's two reasons, one of which is obviously the policies involved in it. Everything about the care system is under pressure. You now have local councils, local authorities who spend more than 50% of their budget. Some of them, it's something like 75% of their budgets purely on social care. So there is a social care system with bin collection attached, as it were. And also there's things such to do with the vacancies in the system. So there's 150,000 vacancies that they need to fill. We're obviously having a big debate right now about immigration. That's going to come down in the future. But of course, unions will be pushing Labour for more social care visas. And the second point, of course, Russell, is the politics of it all, which is that every time a party goes into an election campaign promising to overhaul the social care sector, they get it beaten back at them by the opposition. So 2010, the Tories went after Andy Burnham for his so-called death tax. 2017, it was Theresa May with the so-called dementia tax. Every time a party tries to go into a campaign on this issue, they can't get it, sell it to the electorate. And that is why it needs to be done well before a campaign, which is why campaigners today are so frustrated by the fact they're waiting until 2028, when we all know, frankly, Labour will be campaigning for re-election very heavily.
So what we're saying is that the electorate, voters, don't want to pay for social care for those of us that are getting older and sicker.
Yeah, that is completely correct. And there was previously a cap proposed in the Dilnot review for £86,000, anywhere up to that. After that, the government would cover the cost of it. And I think that it really shows is that we have a real issue in terms of the demographics of our country getting a lot older as a population. And frankly, people don't want to pay that. And for a long time, the debate has been around, having the taxes of America and the wealth provision of Europe. Increasingly, the UK has to make a decision on this, and we don't want higher taxes.
Although, ironically, of course, when it comes to making so-called tough decisions with regard to vulnerable members of society, so things like people like the WASPy women and, of course, the winter fuel allowance being taken away from pensioners, the Labour Party doesn't hesitate to make those decisions. It's a bit at odds with this, isn't it?
Well, I think that some decisions are sort of easy to pull a lever, and, you know, you can quite easily remove pension credit, for instance, winter fuel from pensioners, for instance. That is a fairly quick decision you can make. You can argue as whether it's right or wrong. But then in terms of social care, the problem is there's sort of a morass, and it's like sort of trying to untangle a ball of wool where everything leads to another string, another end. And that is why successive ministers, frankly, have ducked the challenge.
Yeah. Care England, of course, here have said that the Commission was in danger of becoming yet another report that gathers dust while the sector crumbles. I think that's a fair point, isn't it? And it added that people in care today cannot afford to wait any longer because their lives depend on action now. So I guess we could label this as rather insensitive on the part of Labour, not just incompetent, not just kicking the can and the decisions down the road, but a matter of competence, which I'm still waiting for Labour to display some of somewhere. Let's talk about, talking of Labour, 20 Labour councillors have just quit in Broxtowe, which is Broxtowe Borough Council in Nottinghamshire, in objection to Keir Starmer's leadership. Now, this is interesting. Just 6 months in what we would otherwise normally know as a honeymoon period, James, 20 Labour councillors quit on the basis of Keir Starmer's leadership, and in particular his approach to things like WASPy women, things like removing the winter fuel allowance, but particularly what they cite as being an erosion, a dilution of local democracy because of this harebrained scheme, this approach by Labour by way of so-called devolution, which will render many local authorities absorbed by other bigger authorities, where it's said that some people will end up living as far as 50 miles away from their town hall as a consequence of Angela Rayner's decision to consolidate local councillors and local councils. This is, I think, an appalling attempt at diluting democracy, and it's something that these 20 Labour councillors have got a point on, I think, isn't it?
I think on the latter point, you've got to remember how potentially politically important local government can be. You think of the Heath legacy, Edward Heath's government's legacy, 50 years on. What do you remember it for? Well, primarily it's take us into Europe, the trade unions, but thereafter that it's probably the Local Government Reorganisation Act of 1972, which abolished a lot of historic counties. Then, of course, you fast forward 18 years, you get the poll tax, which brought down Margaret Thatcher, the issue of local government finance, not a particularly sexy topic, but it brought down the longest-serving Prime Minister of the 20th century. And so what this sort of history suggests is that actually what is on paper a technical reorganisation can actually have a lot of significance to people across the country. As you say, Russell, people are discovering the importance of local services in terms of having a local provision there. They may not like their local council necessarily, but they support its right to exist. And so it can be very difficult, I think, for a Labour Party that goes into this just promising to abolish it in such a way. Actually, I think there could be lots of political consequences from it. On this terms of the Broxtowe councillors, I think it was interesting, partly they cited that. I think it'll be interesting to see how there's lots of tensions, as I understand it, between behind the scenes in terms of some Labour about who agrees with this and who doesn't, in terms of who's going out for re-election, but also in terms of the policy issues. And I think Keir Starmer has been, I think if you talk to local authorities, in some ways a bit of a disappointment. And I think
that's an understatement, James.
I mean, this is well, I think this a Labour point of view, I think there was a sense perhaps that they wasted 6 months, as it were. And so, it's no surprise that they're seeing like this. Although, of course, you have to temper that by acknowledging there'll be parochial and personal concerns as well as political ones too. Yeah.
Let's just read what Milan Radulovic, who is the council leader at Broxtowe. Now, of course, they have now, as part of their resignation, have formed an independent group called the Broxtowe Independence Group. He has torn up his Labour membership card after 42 years. So a Labour Party member. He's been through all sorts. He's been through, Foot, Callaghan, Corbyn, the whole thing. And despite all of those ups and downs, has decided to take this opportunity to resign his membership after 42 years. He says he's deeply saddened to quit, but had found himself in an impossible position. I cannot support, he says, and will not support another centrist government. Well, I'm not sure it's centrist, but anyway, let's leave that. Intent on destroying local democracy and dictating national policy from a high pedestal. He says, I believe the concentration of power in the hands of fewer people and the abolition of local democracy through the current proposals of super councils is nothing short of dictatorship. What does this mean for Keir Starmer, James? I mean, seriously, we're 6 months in. This is the beginning of the rot setting in, isn't it? You know, as soon as you lose your grassroots, whether it be members, whether it be people on the ground that would otherwise be delivering leaflets or whatever, but particularly councillors and losing control of councils, is this the beginning of the end for Keir Starmer?
No, I don't think we're at that point, but it is potentially the start of the early onset of midterm blues, which is that when you get to these local council elections, given how poorly Labour performed in the last one of these in 2021, back when Boris Johnson was at his peak, you therefore expect Labour potentially to actually, you know, if not necessarily make huge gains, make some modest ones, or maybe only make a few losses. But actually, the way things are going, it does look like reform is very well placed in certain areas to pick up from different parts of the country. So I think that actually it's going to be a portent of things to come. I suspect 2025 isn't the year when, for instance, we see Starmer in a full-on proper crisis. But I do think that if we get to the end of this year and the much promised, much fabled economic growth hasn't materialised, as it looks likely with the front page of the Financial Times today warning that tax rises are inevitable, then I think those questions will start going from being local concerns to articulated at the national level in Parliament.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I think the rot has started to be set in. Let's see what happens, particularly in local elections, although Keir Starmer, of course, and the Labour government doing everything they can to try and postpone, delay and cancel local elections because they know that they'll be wiped out this May if they let them continue. But hey, look, that's, I think, what we used to call democracy. James Hill, political correspondent from The Spectator, thank you very much indeed, as ever.